Hi everyone, thanks for being here. Today I will be talking about the result of my study that is called the adoption of appraisal theory in the analysis of new reports on terrorism towards an understanding of journalistic subjectivity. And this is the way my presentation will be structured. So let me start by talking about the context of my study. So there are a lot of scholars who have coined interesting terms to refer to how ubiquitous the media have become. For example, Marino talks about news junkies. Silverstone, he includes the word media police. And we know this like the back of our hand. I mean, we resort to the news on a regular basis. And also, blogs or social media are at odds with the traditional paradigm of objectivity, and they have taken center stage, according to Hackett in 2009. So, journalism has at its disposal ethical codes. These are guidelines for reporters to follow in order not to interfere with the reliability of information. If you have a look at some of the code of ethics in several parts of the world, including Argentina, you will find that they tend to urge reporters to be ethical and to report in an objective way. However, journalists in practice, in reality, they find themselves caught in a dilemma. And this is related to media effects in general and the right of society to be exposed to unbiased information in particular. According to McQuail, this is the area in which there is a lot of uncertainty. To make things worse, there is consensus among scholars that it is impossible to attain complete impartiality. For example, Chatson argues that writers, they are not government officials, not cultural forces, not reality magically transforming itself into alphabetic signs, but flesh and blood journalists literally compose the stories we call news. So, what is subjectivity then? Well, this is a key concept in my study. I found a lot of definitions from the body of literature, from different authors, and including from philosophy. But I like this one by Archakis and Sakona. They conclude that journalists do not strive for accuracy. Instead, they aim at creating a reader-friendly account of the specific events. So we can see with this definition that it is not only the way they write, but also their decision of reporting some events and excluding others that are determined by how they see the world. So now I'm going to talk about the problem that led me to research. According to Peters, journalism today is a complex profession in which subjectivity and objectivity coexist in various ways. According to Sayers, for example, we can understand people's perspectives by regarding the subjective as part of the objective one. So basically for him, subjectivity and objectivity are the same entity. So this is why we can see that journalists, they are in a contradictory position, because on one hand, they have the ideal of objectivity as proposed by ethical code, as I explained before, and on the other hand, they have the reality and all the influences. Mass media are said to be a primary forum for discursive and ideological reproduction in modern societies. So, in this sense, Garon speaks about the primary aim of the media, which is that of capturing the public eye. So, bearing these problems in mind, the goals of this study are, on one hand, to contribute to the field of applied linguistics in the area of discourse analysis, and on the other, to explore whether the readers tend to agree with the writer's subjectivity after reading a report, and whether they still do 3 weeks later. So now I'm going to talk about the body of literature, starting with the historical overview. According to Rosten in the 1930s, this scholar makes or draws a distinction between journalistic performance and journalistic role conception. Journalists were in a contradictory position because on one hand, they started gaining autonomy in order to attain objectivity, and on the other, their activities were subsumed and influenced by politicians who saw in them the opportunity to disseminate their ideologies. 30 years later, Cohen classifies the reporter's role as neutral and as participants. Today's journalists see themselves as a combination of informer, interpreter, and advocate. Also related to or based on media sociology literature, Helmueller and Melado's approach 6 years ago, in 2015, they claim that we should consider the organizational and political context of journalists. So they talk about commercial pressures, deadlines, and of course, the political system of each country. Media effects in society have been studied with a psychological process or phenomenon that is called framing. According to Edman, framing is the situation in which certain aspects of a news story are salient and therefore encourages a particular point of view in the readership. According to Druckmann, frames in communication provided by the journalist shape frames in thought, what the individual is thinking. This is what he calls framing effects. So, the area that I studied, media effects, has been enriched by a lot of authors, actually. For example, Lippmann and Tuchman, they state that news is a constructed social reality rather than just a mere reflection of the event itself. I mean, what they wanted to say basically is that observation is constrained by cultural preconceptions. And if we have a look at the other side of the coin, I mean the audience, we can find that Lasarfer and Berelson, they develop the two-step flow of communication, and they basically describe the audience's ability to select, to interpret media messages, and to structure their access to news media. They basically analyzed a time frame of 4 weeks. And another important contribution was the one made by Tewksbury in 2009, who finds that exposure to a news article interested for the readership influences their perceptions 3 weeks after exposure. Well, now I'm going to talk about subjectivity per se. Subjectivity is said to be pervasive in the whole process of journalism. This has been demonstrated by scholars such as Grandling, Garon, Chong, and I have included many more in my paper. Then, as regards subjectivity and the appraisal framework, a lot of scholars have investigated precisely subjectivity by using or by employing this framework. For example, Engelbrecht, Pascual and Unger, they are Argentinian researchers, and Jasaka. And they focus on different subsystems of the framework. So when we think about news, this is such an umbrella term, and there is a broad classification in the literature. For example, we have soft news or commentary and so on. But this study is going to be focused on hard news. According to Tuchman, hard news are those pieces of news which have relevance and needs to be published immediately. This concept has been studied from different perspectives, as you can see here. According to Limor and Mann, hard news are related to political, economic, or social topics. According to Smith, they remain relevant for a long period of time. And according to the scholar White, these events are seen as threats to the social order. Okay, now I would like to talk about one of the most revolutionary approaches to the study of language, that is systemic functional linguistics. It was developed in the 1960s by Michael Halliday. According to this view, language is seen as a system of meaning making. Because language is used for different purposes and context. It is called systemic precisely because language is seen as a system of choices. It is called functional because this approach is meaning focused. So the emphasis here is on function rather than on form, but we need to understand, right, and acknowledge the fact that form is still very important because we need to understand the language. According to this scholar, we can communicate meanings on 3 levels simultaneously: ideational, interpersonal, and textual. Textual resources or textual metafunction is related to how the information flow is organized. Ideational aspect has to do with how language is used to organize and express our perception of the world and of our own consciousness. But this study will be focused on the interpersonal aspect because interaction among people, I mean speaker and hearer, and feelings are enacted through language. So in the interpersonal dimension, we are interested to see how writers take evaluative positions and how they present information to the readership. So, deriving from the systemic functional linguistics, we have the Appraisal Framework, which was intended as an attempt to analyze evaluation in discourse, and it was proposed by the Australian researchers Martin and White in the 1990s. They define appraisal, as you can see here, as an approach to exploring, describing, and explaining the way language is used to evaluate, to adopt stances, to construct textual personas, and to manage interpersonal positionings and relationships. So they talk about different degrees of the writer's engagement with their writing. And also, appraisal enables them to present themselves as either differential, dominating, aloof, and so on. So, in the appraisal literature, we can find 3 different subsystems of the framework of appraisal. They are called engagement, attitude, and graduation. Because of time limitations, my study was focused on attitude. Attitude basically means evaluation. And attitude is divided or is subdivided into affect, judgment, and appreciation. Affect has to do with the expression of feelings. It can be in a direct way. For example, I can say, as a writer, I can say, I am happy about this. I am confident about, I don't know, what happened last night. Appreciation has to do with evaluation of semantic and natural phenomena. So basically, appreciation is the evaluation of things or state of affairs. For example, vague or woolly, simple, unbalanced. Judgment are evaluations of human behavior and actions according to normative principles. For example, courageous, right or wrong. As you can see here, judgment at the same time is subdivided into social esteem and social sanction. Social esteem is divided into normality, how special someone is, for example, lucky, unlucky, fashion. Capacity has to do with how capable the person is, for example, skill, strong, weak. And tenacity has to do with how resolute they are. For example, brave, reliable, unreliable. On the other hand, we have social sanction values. Social sanction is divided into veracity, how honest someone is. For example, honest, dishonest, fake, and propriety, how good they are. For example, good, mean, bad, and so on. The linguists also draw a distinction between, you cannot see the text here, but it says explicit versus implicit tokens of judgment. So explicitly, basically means that the word is there in front of you, and they, for example, they can say, writers can say, he corruptly, agrees to whatever. But on the other hand, they can describe situations in such a way that it provokes a reaction in the readership. So this is what they call token of judgment. Moving on to the statement of purpose, there was a study by Newman and Fletcher, and they collect valuable data as regards the topics which people find interesting to read in several countries. So you can see that the list is actually vast, but Argentina is not included. On the other hand, Peirce and McQuail, they claim that media effects are not consistent across cultures. So this is the reason why we do need an investigation about what happens in our country. So this is my hypothesis, what I thought I was going to find at the beginning of my research. So the presence of a journalistic subjectivity in news reports of no interest for the readership influences their reactions towards the event covered immediately after reading it and 3 weeks later. So I'm going to explain the method I used in order to try to find answers. The sample consisted of 12 teachers of English from the province of Buenos Aires who speak English as a foreign language. They were mainly primary and secondary teachers of English, as well as students of the BA language in the BA program, in English language at Universidad Nacional de La Matanza. And their age range varied between 22 and 59. Well, as far as materials go, the first thing I did was to create a survey on Google Forms, and I had I included actually 13 topics. The topics included are COVID-19, science and technology, foreign international news, safety, economy, healthcare and medical information, national politics and government, crime, education, environment and natural disasters, accidents, social matters, terrorism, and weather. And in the second question, they were asked about their preference about national or international reports. First of all, as you can see here, they were asked to give their first name initial, and this is basically because I wanted to guarantee confidentiality. So after getting the results, I found out that nobody had chosen terrorism. Therefore, I chose an article by the Sydney Morning Herald that was published in July 2021, and it is called "As the US Head for the Exits, Afghans Brace for Wars to Come." And of course, then I found subjective references by employing the Appraisal Framework. So what I did basically was I created two Likert scales. I found this technique very useful for my study because, as you know, participants can choose among a high degree of options, even a neutral one, and the data can be quantified and therefore represented in figures that you will see now in a minute. I also tried to identify 5 propositions expressed by the journalist, and you can see them here. Number 1, Dr. Ghani is an incompetent president. Number 2, the Afghanistan government is detached from the citizens. Number 3, the withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan does little to contribute to peace in the region. Afghanistan citizens are worried and helpless, that is number 4. And finally, the Afghans will fall under pressure from the Taliban anytime soon. Then in the second Likert scale, I included the same propositions, but I changed the wording. Because, presenting the individuals with exactly the same words and sentences would probably have kept them alert to the goal of the study. So that is why basically I decided to just to change the words, but the meanings are exactly the same. Also, there was a second question in which they were asked if they had read or watched another news reports related to the war in Afghanistan in a 3 weeks lapse. Well, here you can see the procedure which took place mostly in last year. First, I sent the survey to the teachers on the 29th of June 2021, of course. Then I analyzed the article by using the Appraisal Framework. Then I sent them the first Likert scale on the 13th of July. Then I sent them the second Likert scale by email 3 weeks later in August. And finally, as I said before, with the help of Microsoft Excel, I just created some figures and I analyzed the data. Okay, so now I'm going to start employing the appraisal framework. And this is going to be an analysis on a lexical level because I will be focusing on words and sentences. So this is the first passage. It says, with his military crumbling, President Ashraf Ghani of Afghanistan fired a crucial part of his command structure and brought in a new one. So the writer uses the negative element of appreciation in order to value objects aesthetically. This is the definition given by appraisal literature. By using the word crumbling, The journalist is describing the Afghanistan's army as weak, and also he's describing their incapacity in going to war. There is a shared assumption between the writer and the audience that armies should be victorious and determined in going to war whenever is needed. So in this particular case, we can say that this is a token of judgment, okay? Then the writer expands the mentioned idea by using the word appraisal, and at the end of the sentence, we have a new, that is a positive appreciation resource. So in a way, the writer is trying to soften the negative assertion. Let's continue with number 2. He created a nebulous Supreme State Council, announced months ago, that has hardly met. And as districts fall to the Taliban across the country, he has installed a giant picture of himself outside the airport's domestic terminal. Well, here the writer is describing this Supreme State Council, which is, for those of you who don't know, it is a body that is in charge of providing advice on peace. So basically, the writer is saying that he's describing this council with a negative appreciation resource, nebulous. Then he reinforces this idea with the use of another resource, appreciation resource, that is hardly. And then he employs, or he chooses, the word fall. With the word fall, he's describing, on one hand, how victorious the Taliban are when it comes to conquering land, and how, and the opposite for the Afghans. And then at the end of the sentence, he is saying, he's describing the picture of the president at the airport. I mean, we all agree that this picture seems to be insignificant compared to the tragedy that is going on in Afghanistan. Well, as regards the sample number 3, as the last troops and equipment trickle out of Afghanistan, an atmosphere of unreality has settled over the government and Kabul, the capital. So this is another negative description about the atmosphere of the country. This is similar, the effect created, I mean, is similar to the one of the title, yes, which is, as the US head for the exit, Afghans brace for wars to come. And by employing the noun unreality, the writer is reflecting a case of semantic ambiguity, because on one hand, he is describing the unlikely reality of living in a country where US troops have settled for like 20 years. And also he's talking about the new reality that Afghan citizens will have to face without the American troops. Okay, so let's continue with the sample 4. The government passport office has been jam-packed in recent days, filled with a jostling mob, even though visa options for Afghans are severely limited. Some of the humanitarian organizations on which the beleaguered citizenry depend said they would begin limiting the number of expatriate employees. So the writer is trying to transmit the sense of despair of the population and their attempt to leave the country. So that is why he's using the negative adjective or appreciation that is jam-packed in order to describe the passport office. Then, well, he goes on describing the citizenship as beleaguered. This, of course, can be considered a negative resource that is observed because he's not expressing his own emotional reaction. He's describing someone else's. And we can see how, humanitarian organizations are not giving any kind of solutions to these poor people, And that is why we have the existence of jostling mobs in the passport office. Okay, so let's continue with number 5. Some intelligence assessments have said the Afghan government could fall under pressure from the Taliban in 6 months to 2 years. If that happens, the outlook is likely to be grim for Dr. Ghani, as recent Afghan history demonstrates. Several of his predecessors in the country's top job have met violent ends. So this is a negative description about the future of the president, based on history, basically, right? This is a negative, as I said, prediction, because there is a justification towards the end when the writer talks about the violent ends of the preceding presidents. So he's using both negative appreciation resources, grim and violent. And also, this opinion is supported by a source. This is interesting too. Some intelligence assessments. Well, let's continue with the following passage. The environment is extremely tense, said Omar Zagilwal, a former finance minister, noting what he called an atmosphere of semi-panic in the government. So this is another negative description towards the environment of the country that is supported by a source. But the choice of source is deliberate because these words are uttered by a former finance minister who had direct contact with the president. So that is why the writer is including his words, and of course he's sharing his views. That is why he's quoting these words. More than 1/4 of the country's 421 districts have been seized by the insurgents since early May in a sweeping campaign that has largely targeted Afghanistan's north and even seen some provincial capitals besieged by Taliban fighters. Well, this is the idea. The idea that the writer wants to communicate is the power of the Taliban, and a proof of this is, the number of districts that have been seized by them. Okay, it is interesting here that he's describing the Taliban as being insurgents, meaning they are, people fighting against the government in their own country. So this is a positive judgment regarding capacity. And of course, sweeping is a very good word to reinforce this idea. Let's continue. Humvees, weapons, and piles of ammunition have fallen into Taliban hands, much of it paraded triumphantly on videos released on social media by the group's propagandists. Well, here we can see that the journalist is passing a judgment on the Taliban, describing them as victorious. And this is what tenacity is all about. Tenacity has to do with how resolute someone is in times of crisis. And this is why, all these weapons are at their disposal. Yet the government seems detached from the onslaught on its soldiers and citizens. Well, here we can see another description as regards the government's duty. We all agree that a government should be accountable for the population as a whole. So this is not a very good description, saying that the government seems detached from the onslaught. Grieving mothers wept quietly into their black robes. The government sent a bare handful of police officers to protect the mourners who, like the victims, were vulnerable members of the Hazara ethnic minority. Well, here, the journalist is describing or is discussing the negligence of the government. Why? Because not one single representative of the government showed up to a memorial for the schoolgirls killed in an attack. This is why he's using the word grieving mothers. He's describing the mother's emotions, but this description is again absurd because he's not describing his own emotional reaction, but somebody else's. And vulnerable is another adjective that he uses. And he's mentioning the Hazara ethnic minority. So he's showing resignation and pathos. Officials inside the government, along with those who have left it, describe an atmosphere of improvisation, a bureaucracy caught off guard, despite weeks of warning signs and the absence of a coherent plan. So here, the improvisation that the writer is referring to is completely different to what we think about a government. They should be prepared to take reasonable decisions, right? So that is why this is a negative judgment element related to their capacity. And we can see how even with the warning signs, things are not changing at all in Afghanistan. Public pronouncements are largely limited to ringing denunciations of the Taliban and vows to defeat them, with no hint as how the government intends to do so. So it is clear that the public pronouncements are not straightforward to the reporter's mind, okay? So that is why he's using both negative appreciation elements, limited and ringing. And so apparently the words are just an idea and completely different from what is going on in reality. As a result, Afghanistan citizens are in the dark, worried, and rapidly losing whatever confidence they may once have had in Dr. Ghani. Well, here we have another negative description of the Afghanistan citizens. They are described as being in the dark and worried. These descriptions are observed because the journalist is not describing his own emotional reaction. And we can see that it is also they are disappointed at what is going on in their society, and so they are losing their confidence. Let's continue with the next passage. No one heard their voice, said the council member, Amanusha Kamrani. The soldiers were all but abandoned to the Taliban, and 5 were killed and the rest surrendered. So this is a negative description about the soldiers. So this is the first time the journalist is describing the soldiers' state of mind. And this description is absurd because he's not expressing his own emotional reaction, but somebody else's. And also, this opinion is supported by a source, Amanusha Kamrani. Well, finally, several former aides criticized the president's reliance on a tiny circle of Western educated advisors. They noted that cabinet members were afraid to contradict him because of his tendency to yell at them. Well, what can we say about this passage? Well, the writer is describing the circle, this capacity of the circle of advisors as tiny. So he's saying, well, they have like little capacity. So this is clearly a negative judgment resource. And also there is a description about the cabinet members' feelings that is observed. And there is a focus on the president's aggressiveness. Okay, so in this part, I will discuss the results of the survey and both Likert scales. So as you can see here, the following topics were not selected by any of them. Crime, business, healthcare, environment, traffic accidents, social matters, terrorism, and weather. The most selected topic was education with 6 participants. The second most chosen topic was distributed between COVID-19 and science and technology. And in the third place, we have national politics and government and foreign or international news. As regards the second question, we can see that the majority of them, 11 participants, chose the both option, I mean international and national, and only one of them clicked on national. Well, I will explain briefly. Here we can see with these figures, we can see the level of agreement of the participants towards the 5 statements in both Likert scales. As regards the first statement in the first Likert scale, we can clearly see that the majority of the participants chose the agree option with 50%. The second statement, they selected the strongly agree option, the majority of them, with a 50%. As regards the third statement, the majority of the teachers chose the agree option with a 50%. As regards the statement number 4, a vast majority of them chose the strongly agree option, and 83% actually. And as regards the fifth statement, 58% of the participants chose the agree options. Now I will describe the second Likert scale and the first statement. We can see that they selected almost all the options, but the majority of them chose the neutral option with a 40%. As regards the second statement, most of them selected the strongly agree option, 60%. As regards the third statement, 30% of them chose the disagree option. And as regards the fourth statement, most of them chose the strongly agree option with 40%, as you can see here in the figures. And as far as the fifth statement goes, we can see that most of them chose the neutral option with a 50%. And another important result here is that 2 participants indicated that they had read another news report related to the war in Afghanistan in the 3 weeks lapse. So that is why their answers were excluded from the results. Okay, so here I'm going to explain some of the conclusions I arrived while doing this research. So, as regards the report, basically we can say that the reporter, he is saying or he's criticizing the Afghanistan's ability to be freed from the Taliban's advance, even with the withdrawal of American troops. And he does so by using the negative resources of judgments. But the writer, as we saw, is using also appreciation and affect elements in order to describe the government's ineffectiveness in war situations, and also in order to interpret, as we saw, the citizens and soldiers' state of mind. And this linguistic analysis is in line with Pound's contention that we can indeed find subjective manifestations in hard news articles. Another important conclusion is that the participants' opinions could have been influenced by what the reporter thinks. And this is what I'm going to explain right now. Here you can see, basically, this is a summary of what I have just explained with the percentages. This is how the majority of the participants chose, or the option that they chose the most for each statement in both Likert scale. So as regards the first statement, you can see how the participants chose the agree option at the beginning and a neutral option 3 weeks later. Both point of view differ. So according to my methodology, they have not been influenced because they express two different opinions. As regards the second statement, on the contrary, they selected strongly agree at the beginning and strongly agree in the second Likert scale. So as both point of views are the same, we can say that they have been influenced. As regards the third statement, they chose the agree option at the beginning, and then they went for disagree option. Both point of views are different. As regards the fourth statement, they selected strongly agree option at the beginning and strongly agree in the second Likert scale. So both point of views are the same. So we can say that they have been influenced too, as it happened with the second statement. And as regards statement number 5, they selected agree option. Most of them selected agree at the beginning and neutral at the end. Another reason for this, differences probably is related to the change of wording, but this is something that needs to be checked in the future. Well, finally, I believe that this study has made important contributions to the field. We can see here that this person looks like puzzled, but I just hope you are not puzzled as this person here. So first of all, I think this study has helped citizens become aware of the idea that their judgments, may have been influenced by nuanced articles. This is related to, as I explained at the very beginning, the right of society to be informed to unbiased information in order to make reasonable decisions. This is what Engelbrecht states. And also, I think that this investigation has explained a little bit more what I coined the symbiotic relationship between the consumers and the media. Because on one hand, as I said before, we need to have access to the media and we need to be informed. But the question is, to what extent are we being informed or are we being influenced? I think that this line is blurred. So that is why I think that this research has given us some answers or even questions. Why not? So thank you very much for your time. This is my email address. If you have any questions or if you want a copy of my paper, feel free to write. Okay, so thank you very much and have a nice day.